everyone, and welcome back to Fantasy Chat. I'm Ady, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Xander. How's it going, Xander?
Hey, Ady. I'm doing great, thanks. Really excited about today's topic, actually. We're diving into something that I think hits close to home for a lot of us fantasy lovers.
Absolutely. Today we're talking about why we still need fantasy. You know, that enduring human need for wonder that just doesn't seem to go away, no matter how advanced or rational our world becomes.
Right? And I think this is especially relevant now because you hear people sometimes dismiss fantasy as just escapism, like it's somehow less valuable than other genres.
Oh, totally. The whole "why don't you read something real" argument.
Exactly. But I think that misses the point entirely. Fantasy isn't just about escaping reality. It's actually a way of understanding reality better, through different lenses.
I love that. So we're going to explore all the ways fantasy serves essential human needs that go way beyond just entertainment. Should be a fun conversation.
Definitely. So let's start with that escapism thing because I think even when fantasy does provide escape, that's not automatically a bad thing. Sometimes we need to step outside our immediate reality to gain perspective.
Right, like when you're dealing with something overwhelming in your life.
Exactly. Fantasy can give us that safe metaphorical distance to process trauma or difficult emotions. Think about how many fantasy stories deal with themes of loss, betrayal, finding your identity, overcoming impossible odds.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like when I was going through a really tough time in college, I remember reading The Lord of the Rings and finding this weird comfort in Frodo's journey.
How interesting. What was it about that specifically?
I think it was the idea that even when you feel completely overwhelmed and like you can't possibly carry your burden anymore, somehow you find the strength to take the next step, and you're not doing it alone.
That's beautiful. And that's exactly what I mean about fantasy helping us understand reality better. You found a framework for dealing with your actual struggles through this completely fictional journey.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things fantasy does that maybe other genres can't do as well. It isolates these big moral and emotional questions in a way that makes them easier to examine.
Yes, like the One Ring as a symbol of absolute power and corruption. You can explore that theme without getting bogged down in the complexities of real-world politics.
Right. It strips away all the noise and lets you focus on the essential question: what does power do to people?
Exactly. And speaking of power, I love how fantasy often empowers the powerless. You know, hobbits saving the world, orphans discovering their chosen ones, the underdog who turns out to have hidden strength.
Oh, that's such a good point. There's something deeply satisfying about those stories, isn't there?
I think it speaks to something we all feel sometimes, that sense of being small or overlooked or not important. Fantasy says, actually, you might be the most important person in the story.
That's beautiful. It validates the inner sense we all have that our lives matter, that we have agency, that we can make a difference.
And you know what else I think fantasy does really well? It preserves wonder in a world that's increasingly mapped out and measured.
Ooh, yes, tell me more about that.
Well, think about it. We live in a time where you can Google Earth any corner of the planet, where we understand so much about how the natural world works. There's less mystery than ever before.
Right, no more "here be dragons" on the maps.
Exactly. But I think humans need mystery and wonder. We need to feel like there are still undiscovered realms, still magic left in the world. Fantasy provides that.
That makes so much sense. It's like fantasy keeps alive the part of us that looks up at the stars and wonders what if, instead of just calculating distances and chemical compositions.
Yes, both perspectives are valuable, but we need both. The scientific understanding and the sense of mystery and possibility.
And I think fantasy also helps us deal with chaos. Like, it gives narrative structure to a reality that can often feel random and meaningless.
Oh, that's a really good point. How do you mean?
Well, in real life, bad things happen to good people for no reason, good deeds go unpunished, there's no clear hero's journey arc to our lives. But fantasy gives us stories where actions have consequences, where good ultimately triumphs, where there's meaning to suffering.
Right. It's not that we believe life actually works that way.
Exactly, but it gives us a framework for finding meaning, for believing that our struggles matter, that there's some larger pattern or purpose.
That's fascinating. It's almost like fantasy serves as modern mythology in a lot of ways, especially for people in more secular cultures.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's exactly right. Traditional mythology used to serve a lot of these same functions, explaining the unexplainable, providing moral frameworks, connecting us to something larger than ourselves.
And fantasy literature is doing that for us now. Think about how many people quote Gandalf or Dumbledore when they need wisdom or inspiration.
Oh my god, yes. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. I've seen that quote help people through some really dark moments.
Exactly. These stories are providing genuine wisdom and comfort. They're not just entertainment.
And you know what else I love about fantasy? How it builds community. Like, you can be complete strangers, but if you both love the same fantasy series, suddenly you have this instant connection.
Oh, totally. I've made some of my closest friendships through fantasy fandoms.
Right, and it crosses all kinds of boundaries. Age, culture, background. A shared love of fantasy can bring together people who might never connect otherwise.
That's such a good point. And I think part of that is because fantasy deals with these universal human experiences: love, loss, courage, friendship, the battle between good and evil.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Everyone can relate to feeling like the underdog, or struggling with temptation, or losing someone you love.
And I think fantasy also connects generations in a really special way. Parents sharing the books they loved with their kids, grandparents passing down fairy tales.
Oh, that's so true. There's something about fantasy that remains timeless in a way that other genres sometimes don't.
Right, because the themes are eternal. A coming-of-age story in a magical world speaks to something universal, whether you're reading it in 1950 or 2024.
And can we talk about how fantasy celebrates imagination in a culture that's so focused on productivity and efficiency?
Oh yes, that's huge. We live in this world where everything has to have a measurable outcome, a practical purpose.
Exactly. But fantasy says, what if we just imagine something beautiful for the sake of imagining it? It values creativity and wonder as ends in themselves.
That's so important. I think we need that reminder that not everything valuable has to be useful in the traditional sense.
Right. Beauty and story and enchantment. These things matter too, not just material comfort or practical achievements.
And I think fantasy also helps us confront mortality in a way that feels safe but still meaningful.
How so?
Well, think about how many fantasy stories deal with sacrifice, with characters facing death for a greater purpose, or with the idea that some things are worth dying for. It lets us explore these profound questions about mortality and meaning without the immediate terror of our own death.
That's really insightful. And it often presents death not as an ending, but as a transformation or a passage to something else.
Exactly. Or it shows how someone can live on through their impact on others, through the stories told about them. It gives us frameworks for finding meaning in mortality.
And I think fantasy also challenges reality by showing us alternative possibilities. Like, it asks, what if the world worked differently? Which can actually inspire real change.
Ooh, that's a great point. Fantasy can be pretty subversive when you think about it.
Right. It shows us worlds where different social structures exist, where magic levels the playing field, where the old systems get overthrown. It expands our sense of what's possible.
And that imagination can actually feed back into real-world problem-solving and innovation.
Exactly. You have to be able to imagine something different before you can create it.
Now, I want to be fair here. Are there any downsides to our love affair with fantasy? Any ways it might not be serving us well?
That's a good question. I suppose if someone became so immersed in fantasy that they stopped engaging with real-world problems or relationships, that could be unhealthy.
Right. True escapism rather than using fantasy as a lens for understanding reality better.
Exactly. Or if the clear moral frameworks in fantasy made someone impatient with the messiness and ambiguity of real-world ethics.
That's a really good point. Real life is more complicated than good guys versus bad guys.
Right. But I think as long as we're reading fantasy thoughtfully, as one part of a balanced intellectual diet, it serves us well.
I agree. And I think what we've talked about today shows that fantasy serves some really essential human needs. It's not frivolous or childish, it's addressing deep psychological and spiritual requirements.
Exactly. We need wonder, we need meaning, we need story, we need to believe that our lives matter and that we have agency. Fantasy provides all of that.
And it does it in a way that science or pure rationality can't. There are dimensions of human experience that require narrative, metaphor, imagination.
Right. We're both rational beings and creatures who need narrative purpose. Fantasy helps us live as both.
That's a perfect way to put it. So the next time someone asks you why you read fantasy, you can tell them you're meeting essential human needs for wonder, meaning, community, and moral exploration.
And preserving your capacity for enchantment in a disenchanted world.
I love that. Well, I think that's a wrap for today's episode. This has been such a rich conversation, Ady.
It really has. I hope our listeners found it as thought-provoking as I did. Thanks for joining us on Fantasy Chat, everyone.
Yes, and remember, whether you're team epic fantasy or urban fantasy, sword and sorcery or magical realism, you're participating in something ancient and essential.
Keep reading, keep wondering, and we'll see you next time for another Fantasy Chat. Until then, may your adventures be epic and your magic always work when you need it most.
Bye, everyone.